Library intern vanished in 1991, 13 years later. Her glasses are found, melted inside a locked case. The Millbrook Public Library stood like a weathered sentinel against the grey October sky of 2004, its red brick facade darkened by 13 years of Maine winters. Sarah Chen pushed through the heavy oak doors, her breath still visible in the crisp morning air. At 35, she had returned to her hometown after her mother's funeral, never expecting to find herself volunteering at the very place where her sister had vanished without a trace. The familiar scent of old books and floor polish wrapped around her like a childhood memory. Mrs. Henderson, the aging head librarian, looked up from her circulation desk with tired eyes that had seen too much sorrow pass through these quiet halls. "Sarah, dear, thank you for coming in again today. I know this can't be easy for you." The older woman's voice carried the weight of unspoken understanding. Everyone in Millbrook remembered what had happened to Amy Chen in the summer of 1991. Sarah nodded, adjusting her wool coat. "It helps, actually, being here. Amy loved this place so much." She paused, looking around the main reading room where afternoon light filtered through tall windows. "What would you like me to work on today?" "Well, we're finally updating the display cases in the local history section. Some of those exhibits have been there for decades. There's a storage room in the basement where we keep items that need cataloguing or repair." Mrs. Henderson handed her a ring of old brass keys. "Take your time down there. Call if you need anything." The basement stairs creaked under Sarah's feet as she descended into the building's lower level. The fluorescent lights flickered before steadying, casting harsh shadows across rows of metal shelving units filled with archived materials, old equipment, and forgotten treasures from the library's 90-year history. Sarah found the storage room easily enough, a cramped space lined with boxes and display cases in various states of disrepair. She began methodically examining the contents, separating items that could be restored from those beyond saving, old photographs of town founders, yellowed newspaper clippings, antique medical instruments donated by the long-closed Millbrook Hospital, and various artifacts that told the story of their small coastal community. It was nearly noon when she noticed the locked glass case pushed against the far wall, partially hidden behind a stack of archived town meeting minutes. Unlike the other display cases, this one was sealed tight, its brass lock green with age. Sarah tried several keys from Mrs. Henderson's ring before finding one that fit. The lock clicked open with a metallic scrape that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet basement. Sarah lifted the glass top carefully, mindful of the hinges. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, lay an assortment of items that seemed random at first glance. A tarnished silver locket, a child's leather boot, a fountain pen, and what appeared to be— Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she reached for the twisted, melted remains of eyeglasses. The frames had been warped by extreme heat, the metal bent and fused in places, the lenses completely destroyed, but she recognized them instantly. The distinctive tortoise-shell pattern of the frames, the small silver studs at the temples, the way the nose bridge had been slightly adjusted to fit a particular face. These were Amy's glasses, the ones she had been wearing the last time Sarah saw her alive. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible in the basement stillness. She pulled out her cell phone with shaking hands, the display case key clattering to the floor. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to come down here right away and I think we need to call the police." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Henderson's shocked gasp when she saw the glasses, the arrival of Sheriff Tom Brennan, a man who had been a young deputy 13 years ago when Amy disappeared. His careful examination of the case, his gentle questions about how long it had been locked, who might have had access. "Sarah, I have to ask," Sheriff Brennan said, his weathered face grave. "Are you absolutely certain these belong to Amy?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I helped her pick them out at the optometrist's office in Bangor. She was so excited about them. Said they made her look serious, like a real librarian." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Tom, what does this mean? What kind of heat could do this to glass and metal?" The sheriff exchanged a meaningful look with Mrs. Henderson. "The kind of heat that suggests Amy's disappearance wasn't what we thought it was. This changes everything, Sarah. After all these years, we finally have evidence that something terrible happened to your sister, right here in Millbrook." As they carefully bagged the glasses as evidence, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone had wanted these to be found. The case had been unlocked for a reason. placed where a family member might eventually discover it. Someone with access to the library's basement had been keeping a terrible secret for 13 years, and now that secret was about to be revealed. The memory hit Sarah like a physical blow as she drove home from the library that evening. Amy, at 19, so proud of her internship at the Millbrook Public Library, bubbling with excitement about her first real job. Fresh out of her freshman year at the University of Maine, she had been thrilled to spend the summer working with books and helping to organize the library's historical archives. "It's not just shelving books, Sarah," Amy had explained over dinner that June evening in 1991. "Mrs. Henderson says, I'm going to help digitize some of the older records, real historical preservation work." Her eyes had sparkled behind those tortoiseshell frames, and she'd pushed a strand of black hair away from her face in that unconscious gesture Sarah remembered so well. Their parents had been pleased. Mr. and Mrs. Chen had always emphasized the importance of education and hard work to their daughters. Having Amy spend her summer at the library rather than at the beach with her friends had seemed like a responsible choice, a stepping stone toward her dream of becoming a librarian herself. Sarah pulled into her childhood home's driveway, the same split-level house where she and Amy had grown up. She had inherited it after their mother's death 6 months ago, their father having passed away 5 years earlier. The house felt impossibly empty now, filled with the weight of memories and unanswered questions. Inside, she poured herself a glass of wine and settled into her father's old recliner, letting the memories wash over her. Amy's last day at the library had been July 15th, 1991, a Tuesday. She had left for work that morning at 8 o'clock, same as always, riding her blue 10-speed bicycle the 1.5 miles to the library. She had never come home. The police investigation had been thorough but ultimately fruitless. Amy's bicycle had been found in the library's parking lot, unlocked and abandoned. Her purse was discovered in the staff break room, untouched. She had simply vanished somewhere between the library's closing time at 6 p.m. and when the building had been locked for the night. The theory at the time had been that Amy had left the library on foot, perhaps meeting someone she knew. There had been no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play within the building itself. The prevailing assumption had been that she had either run away or been abducted somewhere between the library and home. But the glasses changed everything. Sarah reached for the photo album on the side table, the one their mother had kept filled with pictures of both daughters. She found the photo she was looking for, Amy at her high school graduation, beaming at the camera, wearing those same tortoise-shell glasses. The lenses had been perfectly clear then, the frame straight and unblemished. To melt glass and metal like that would require temperatures of at least 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Sarah had looked it up on her laptop when she got home. That kind of heat suggested a furnace, a kiln, or some other industrial heating source. But what did the Millbrook Public Library have that could generate such extreme temperatures? The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Sheriff Brennan's voice was careful, professional. "Sarah, I wanted to update you on what we've found so far. We're treating this as a potential homicide investigation now. The glasses have been sent to the state crime lab for analysis." "What about the display case? Any idea how long it had been locked?" "That's what's interesting. Mrs. Henderson says she doesn't remember ever seeing that particular case before. It's not in any of the library's inventory records going back to the 1980s. Someone put it there, probably fairly recently, and wanted it to look like it had been there for years." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. So someone has been keeping Amy's glasses all this time, and they decided to, give them back? That's one possibility. The other is that we're dealing with someone who wants to taunt us. Someone who knows we never stopped looking for answers about Amy. Sheriff Brennan's voice was grim. "Sarah, I need to ask you something. Have you noticed anyone paying particular attention to you since you've been volunteering at the library? Anyone who seems overly interested in your work there?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Not really. Mrs. Henderson has been wonderful, of course. There's Mr. Kowalski, who comes in every day to read the newspapers. A few other regulars. Why?" "Because whoever put those glasses in that case knew you'd be the one to find them. They knew you'd recognize them immediately. This feels personal, Sarah, like someone's been waiting for you to come back to town." After hanging up, Sarah stood at her kitchen window, looking out at the darkening street. Somewhere in Millbrook, someone knew what had happened to Amy. Someone had been living with that secret for 13 years, and now they were ready to tell it. But why now? And why this way? The answer, she suspected, was going to be more terrible than anything she had imagined. The next morning brought a cold rain that drummed against the windows of the Millbrook Police Department. Sarah sat in Sheriff Brennan's office, cradling a cup of coffee and trying to process the questions that had kept her awake all night. "We've contacted the state police," Brennan explained, shuffling through a thick file folder. "They're sending a detective team down from Augusta. This is bigger than anything we can handle locally." He looked up at her with tired eyes. "Sarah, I have to be honest with you. We always suspected Amy didn't leave town voluntarily, but after 13 years with no leads, no evidence, we were starting to accept that we might never know what happened." Detective Lisa Warren arrived from the state police just after 10 a.m. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with sharp green eyes and graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Sarah liked her immediately. There was something reassuring about her direct manner and obvious competence. "I've reviewed the original case file," Detective Warren said, settling into a chair across from Sarah. "Your sister was a conscientious young woman. No history of running away. No romantic entanglements that might have led to trouble. The investigation at the time was hampered by the lack of physical evidence and the assumption that she had left the library alive. But the glasses prove she didn't," Sarah said quietly. "They prove something happened to her there. They prove she encountered extreme heat somewhere. We're still working on connecting that to the library specifically." Warren pulled out a notebook. "I need you to tell me about the people who worked at the library in 1991. Anyone who might have had access to the building after hours." Sarah concentrated, trying to remember. Mrs. Henderson, of course. She was the head librarian then, too. There was a part-time assistant, I think her name was Janet something, and there was a custodian, an older man who came in evenings to clean. She paused. "Oh, and there was a volunteer who helped with the historical archives. Amy mentioned him a few times, said he was really knowledgeable about local history. Do you remember his name?" "I think it was Robert something." "Amy said he was a widower, retired, and that he'd donated a lot of materials to the library's collection." Detective Warren made notes. "We'll need to track down everyone who had access to the building that summer. After 13 years, some of these people may have moved away or died, but we'll find them." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Deputy Martinez entered, looking troubled. "Detective Warren, we've got something at the library. Mrs. Henderson called it in about an hour ago." They drove to the library in Warren's unmarked sedan, windshield wipers fighting against the persistent rain. Mrs. Henderson met them at the front entrance, her face pale with worry. "I came in early to do some research for you," she explained to Detective Warren. "I was looking through our old volunteer records and employment files. When I went down to the basement to check on that storage room again, I found, well, you'll see." The basement felt different now, charged with an ominous energy that hadn't been there the day before. In the storage room, the display case where Amy's glasses had been found was now completely empty. But arranged on the floor in front of it, as if someone had been there during the night, were 3 items that definitely hadn't been there before. A library card, yellowed with age, made out to Robert Marsh, a small silver key that looked like it might fit an old desk or filing cabinet, and a photograph, black and white, showing a young woman with long dark hair standing in front of what appeared to be an old industrial building. "I've never seen any of these before," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice shaking slightly. "I locked the library myself last night. I set the alarm. I don't understand how anyone could have gotten in." Detective Warren examined the items carefully without touching them. "Or someone who never left," she said grimly. "Someone who knows this building better than anyone realizes." Sarah picked up the library card, studying the faded ink. "Robert Marsh. This has to be the volunteer Amy mentioned. Is he still in town?" Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "Oh yes, he still comes in regularly. In fact, he was here yesterday, not long after you found the glasses. Said he was concerned about all the police activity." She paused. "He was very interested in what you had discovered, Sarah. Asked a lot of questions about the display case." "What kind of questions?" Detective Warren asked. "Where exactly it had been found, how long I thought it had been there. Whether Sarah had looked at anything else in the storage room." Mrs. Henderson's voice grew quieter. "Now that I think about it, he seemed nervous, which was unusual for Robert. He's normally very calm, very composed." Detective Warren was already reaching for her radio. "I need an address for Robert Marsh, and I want a unit sent to watch his house immediately." But as they would soon discover, Robert Marsh's house on Elm Street was empty. The newspapers piled up on his porch suggested he hadn't been home for at least 2 days. A neighbor reported seeing him loading boxes into his car late Monday night, the same day Amy's glasses had been found. "He's running," Detective Warren said as they stood in Marsh's driveway. "After 13 years, he's finally running," which meant they were getting close to the truth. But it also meant that Robert Marsh knew they were getting close. And that, Sarah realized, with a growing sense of dread, made him very dangerous indeed. Robert Marsh had been volunteering at the Millbrook Public Library for 15 years when Amy Chen disappeared. Detective Warren learned this from the employment records Mrs. Henderson had pulled from the basement files, records that painted a picture of a man who had made the library his second home. Born in 1931, Marsh had moved to Millbrook in 1975 after retiring from a career as an industrial heating engineer. His wife had died of cancer in 1976, leaving him alone in the modest Cape Cod house on Elm Street. By all accounts, he had been a model citizen, quiet, helpful, and deeply knowledgeable about local history. "He was like a walking encyclopedia," Mrs. Henderson explained, as they sat in the library's conference room, surrounded by boxes of archived materials. "Robert could tell you about every building in town, every family that had lived here for more than a generation. He was particularly interested in the industrial history of the area." Sarah felt a chill. Industrial history, like the old mills. Exactly. Millbrook used to be a mill town, you know. We had 3 textile mills operating here until the 1960s. Robert had worked in similar facilities before coming to Maine. He understood the machinery, the processes. Mrs. Henderson paused, a look of dawning realization crossing her face. "Oh my God, the old boiler room." Detective Warren leaned forward. "What about it?" "The library was built in 1914, originally as a Carnegie library. But before that, this site was part of the Millbrook Cotton Mill complex. When they built the library, they left the old boiler room intact in the basement. It's been sealed off for decades, but Robert knew about it. He was the one who told me about the building's history." "Is the boiler room still accessible?" Warren asked. I'm not sure. I've never been down there. Robert mentioned it a few times, said it was a shame such an interesting piece of industrial history was just sitting empty." Mrs. Henderson stood up abruptly. "We should look, right now." They made their way to the basement, Warren leading with a flashlight. The storage room where Amy's glasses had been found was adjacent to what appeared to be a solid brick wall, but when Warren examined it more closely, she found something that made her blood run cold. "This isn't original construction," she said, running her hands along the mortar lines. "This wall was built to seal something off. And look here." She pointed to a section where the brick seemed slightly different. "Someone's been maintaining this recent mortar work." It took the fire department's rescue team an hour to carefully remove enough bricks to create an opening. The smell that emerged was immediately recognizable. Decades of dust, mildew, and something else. Something that made Sarah step back instinctively. "Jesus Christ," Warren breathed, shining her flashlight into the revealed space. The old boiler room was larger than any of them had expected. A cavernous space dominated by an enormous cast-iron boiler that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. But it was what surrounded the boiler that made Sarah's knees weak. The space had been converted into a living area of sorts. An old army cot sat against one wall, covered with musty blankets. A wooden table held the remains of canned food and bottled water, and along the far wall, carefully arranged on makeshift shelves, were dozens of personal items: jewelry, clothing, shoes, glasses. "He's been keeping them here," Sarah whispered. "Trophies." Detective Warren was already on her radio calling for backup and the state crime scene unit. But Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the boiler itself. The massive iron door was slightly ajar, and she could see that the interior had been modified. Modern heating elements had been installed, along with what appeared to be temperature controls. "He turned it into a crematorium," Warren said quietly, following Sarah's gaze. "The son of a bitch turned it into a crematorium." A noise from the shadows made them all freeze. A soft scraping sound, like someone dragging something across the floor. Warren drew her weapon, motioning for the others to stay back. "Robert Marsh, this is the Maine State Police. If you're in there, I need you to come out with your hands visible." Silence. Then from the darkness beyond the boiler, a voice that sounded aged and tired. "I've been waiting for you, Sarah. Waiting for you to come home and find her." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Robert Marsh had been in the boiler room the entire time, hidden in the shadows, watching them discover his terrible secret. "I never wanted to hurt Amy." His voice continued, hollow and distant. "She was so beautiful, so perfect, just like my Sarah." "Your Sarah?" Warren called out, her weapon still drawn. "My wife, my beautiful Sarah. She died so young, so suddenly, but Amy looked just like her. Same hair, same eyes, same way of tilting her head when she was concentrating." The voice was getting closer. "I just wanted to keep her safe, keep her with me." Sarah felt Detective Warren's hand on her arm, pulling her back toward the opening in the wall, but she couldn't move. After 13 years, she was finally going to learn the truth about what had happened to her sister, and she was terrified of what that truth might be. Robert Marsh stepped into the light slowly, his hands raised but not empty. In his right hand, he held an old photograph. In his left, a small silver locket that glinted in the beam of Warren's flashlight. "Don't come any closer," Detective Warren warned, her weapon trained on him. "Put down whatever you're holding and lie face down on the floor." Marsh shook his head sadly. He was smaller than Sarah had expected, a thin man in his 70s with wispy grey hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through her. His clothes were rumpled, as if he had been sleeping in them for days. "I can't do that yet," he said quietly. "Not until Sarah understands. She needs to know that I loved her sister, that I never meant for things to happen the way they did." "Tell me what happened to Amy," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Warren shot her a warning look, but Sarah stepped forward anyway. "Please, I need to know." Marsh's eyes filled with tears. "She was so young, so full of life. Every day that summer she would come down here to help me catalogue the old records. We would talk about history, about the families who had lived in Millbrook for generations. She was fascinated by the stories." "The stories about what?" "About the mill workers who had died in the fire of 1923. About the families who had lost everything when the mills closed. About my Sarah." He held up the photograph, and Sarah could see it showed a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. "My wife. She died in 1976, but I still saw her everywhere. In the grocery store, walking down Main Street, sitting in the library reading room." Warren kept her weapon steady. "What happened on July 15, 1991? Amy was working late, helping me move some of the older archives down here for better climate control. She found some boxes that had been sealed since the 1920s. When she opened them, she found photographs of the mill fire victims. And she found this." He held up the locket. It belonged to one of the women who died in the fire, a woman named Sarah Kowalski. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Kowalski? Like the man who comes to the library every day? Her great-grandson. He's been looking for this locket for 20 years. His great-grandmother was wearing it when she died." Marsh's voice cracked. "Amy said she was going to return it to him immediately. She was so excited about reuniting a family with their history." "But you didn't want her to," Warren said, beginning to understand. "I couldn't let her, don't you see? This locket was all I had left of my Sarah. When I saw Amy holding it, wearing it around her neck to see how it looked, she was my wife. For just a moment, my Sarah had come back to me. Sarah felt sick. What did you do?" "I asked her to stay, to have dinner with me, to let me tell her more stories about the old days. But she said she had to go home, that her parents would be worried." Marsh's hands were shaking now. "I couldn't let her leave. I couldn't lose Sarah again." "So you locked her in here," Warren said grimly. I thought if I could just keep her safe, keep her with me, she would eventually understand that she would want to stay." He looked directly at Sarah, his eyes pleading. "I gave her books to read. I brought her food. I made sure she was comfortable." "For how long?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. 3 days. She was so frightened at first, but then she started talking to me. Really talking. About her dreams, her plans for the future. She was going to be a librarian, just like Mrs. Henderson. She was going to help people find the information they needed. Tears were streaming down his face now. She reminded me so much of my Sarah. The way she laughed, the way she pushed her glasses up her nose when she was thinking. Detective Warren's finger was on the trigger. "What happened on the 3rd day?" "She tried to escape. I had brought her dinner, and when I opened the door, she pushed past me. She was so small, so quick, she made it all the way to the stairs before I caught her." Marsh's voice broke completely. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to come back, but when I grabbed her arm, she fell, hit her head on the concrete steps." Sarah sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the horror of what she was hearing. Amy had been alive for 3 days. 3 days when she might have been saved if someone had known where to look. "She wasn't dead," Marsh continued, his voice now just a whisper. "But she was hurt badly, unconscious. I carried her back to the room and tried to take care of her, but she never woke up. She died that night, holding my hand. And then you burned her body, Warren said, the disgust clear in her voice. I couldn't let them take her away. I couldn't let them put her in the ground where she would be cold and alone. Marsh looked at the modified boiler with something like tenderness. I kept her safe. I kept her with me. And I saved her glasses because they were the last thing she had touched. The sound of sirens was growing louder outside. Backup was arriving, along with the crime scene unit. But Sarah couldn't stop staring at the man who had destroyed her family. You've been living down here, she said. All these years you've been living with what you did. I come here every night. I talk to her. I tell her about the people who come to the library, about the books she would have enjoyed. He looked at Sarah with something like hope. I kept her glasses safe for you. I knew someday you would come back. I knew you would want to know what happened to her. Detective Warren stepped forward, her weapon still drawn. Robert Marsh, you're under arrest for the murder of Amy Chen. You have the right to remain silent. But Sarah wasn't listening to the Miranda warning. She was staring at the shelves full of personal items, realizing that Amy might not have been Robert Marsh's only victim. 13 years of grief and unanswered questions were about to be replaced by a new horror. How many others had there been? How many families had spent years wondering what had happened to their loved ones, never knowing that their answers lay buried in the basement of the Millbrook Public Library? The crime scene unit worked through the night, carefully cataloguing every item they found in Robert Marsh's underground chamber. By dawn, they had identified personal effects belonging to at least 7 different people, spanning a period of nearly 20 years. Sarah sat in the police station's break room, nursing her 4th cup of coffee and trying to process what Detective Warren had told her. Amy hadn't been the first. She hadn't even been the last. The oldest items we found date back to 1973, Warren explained, consulting her notes. A charm bracelet with the initials MR and a class ring from Millbrook High School, class of 1972. We're cross-referencing with missing persons reports from that time period. Sheriff Brennan entered the room, his face grim. We've got a preliminary identification on the bracelet. Melissa Roberts, 18 years old, disappeared in July 1973. She was supposed to start at the University of Maine that fall. He sat down heavily. Her parents died in the 1990s, never knowing what happened to her. How many? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Based on the personal effects, we think at least 7 victims over 20 years, all young women, all between the ages of 16 and 25. Warren's voice was professional, but Sarah could hear the anger underneath. Marsh has confessed to Amy's murder, but he's not talking about the others yet. What about the boiler? Have you found any remains? The temperature in that thing could reach over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. After 20 years of operation, there's nothing left to find. Warren paused. I'm sorry, Sarah, I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. It wasn't about what she wanted to hear. It was about the terrible realization that her sister had been part of a pattern, a series of murders that had gone undetected for decades. How many families had lived with the same uncertainty, the same desperate hope that their loved ones might still be alive somewhere? I want to talk to him, Sarah said suddenly. That's not a good idea. He's not in his right mind, and I want to talk to him, Sarah repeated more firmly this time. He knew my sister. He kept her alive for 3 days. I need to know what she said, what she was thinking. Warren exchanged a look with Sheriff Brennan. I can arrange for you to observe the interview, but I don't think direct contact is advisable. This man is dangerous, Sarah. He's been living in a fantasy world for 20 years. An hour later, Sarah found herself in the observation room of the county jail, watching through one-way glass as Detective Warren questioned Robert Marsh. He sat at a metal table, his hands folded, looking smaller and more frail than he had in the boiler room. Tell me about Melissa Roberts, Warren said, placing the charm bracelet on the table between them. Marsh looked at the bracelet for a long moment. She was the first. I had just moved to Millbrook, and I was so lonely after Sarah died. Melissa used to come to the library to study. She was so young, so full of life. He touched the bracelet gently. She looked nothing like my Sarah, but she was kind to me. She would ask about my work, about the mill history. What happened to her? The same thing that happened to Amy. I couldn't let her leave. I thought if I could just keep her safe, keep her with me, she would understand. Marsh's voice was flat, emotionless. But she never understood. None of them did. Warren leaned forward. How many others were there? I don't remember all their names. There was Jennifer in 1975. Susan in 1978, Patricia in 1983. He recited the names like he was reading from a shopping list. They all came to the library. They all reminded me of someone I had lost. Not just your wife, Warren said. You were replacing other people too. Marsh nodded slowly. My daughter. She would have been about Amy's age if she had lived. She was stillborn in 1974. Sarah and I were going to name her Amy. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. Amy had been named for Robert Marsh's dead daughter. That's why he had been so drawn to her, why he had kept her alive for 3 days instead of killing her immediately. What did Amy say to you during those 3 days? Warren asked. She told me about her family, about her sister Sarah who was going to be a teacher, about her parents who had worked so hard to give their daughters a better life. Marsh's eyes filled with tears. She said Sarah would be worried about her, that I should let her call home. But you didn't. I couldn't, don't you see? If I let her call home, she would leave. They would take her away from me. He looked directly at the one-way glass, as if he could see Sarah watching. I told her about my Sarah, about how much I missed her. Amy said she was sorry for my loss, that she understood how hard it must be to lose someone you love. Sarah pressed her hand against the glass, wishing she could reach through it and touch her sister one more time. Amy had been kind to her captor even in the midst of her terror. She had tried to comfort a man who was holding her prisoner. On the last day, Marsh continued, Amy asked me to promise her something. She said if anything happened to her, I should make sure her sister knew that she loved her, that she was thinking about her family until the end. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She doubled over, sobbing, while Warren continued the interview on the other side of the glass. After 13 years, she finally had the message she had been waiting for. But the price of that message was the knowledge that 7 other families had lost their daughters to the same man, 7 other families who were about to learn that their years of hope had been built on a lie. Outside the jail, the media was already gathering. Word of the arrests and the discovery of the underground chamber had spread quickly through the small town. Sarah knew that by evening, Millbrook would be swarming with reporters and curiosity seekers. The quiet library where Amy had dreamed of working would never be the same. None of them would ever be the same. The revelation that Robert Marsh had been killing young women for 20 years shattered the tight-knit community of Millbrook. By Wednesday morning, news vans from Portland, Bangor, and even Boston had descended on the small town, their reporters eager to understand how such a monster could have operated undetected for so long. Sarah found herself at the center of the media storm, the face of a tragedy that had suddenly become much larger than one missing girl. She had agreed to a single press conference, hoping to speak for all the victims' families while asking for privacy to grieve. My sister Amy was 19 years old when she disappeared, Sarah told the assembled reporters outside the county courthouse. She wanted to be a librarian. She loved books and history and helping people find information they needed. Her voice caught slightly. She was kind and trusting, and she died because a man took advantage of that kindness. Behind her, the families of the other identified victims stood in a somber row. Mrs. Catherine Wells, whose daughter Jennifer had vanished in 1975. Thomas Roberts, Melissa's older brother, who had never stopped looking for his sister. Patricia Nungian's parents, who had moved to Millbrook from California in 1980 and lost their daughter 3 years later. We want people to know that these women were not statistics, Sarah continued. They were daughters, sisters, friends. They had dreams and plans and people who loved them. Robert Marsh stole all of that from them and from us. The questions came fast and angry. How could the police have missed the signs? How could someone operate a crematorium in the basement of a public building without anyone noticing? What oversight failures had allowed this to happen? Sheriff Brennan stepped forward to field the more technical questions. We're conducting a full review of the original investigations. The truth is, Robert Marsh was a skilled manipulator who had detailed knowledge of police procedures from his years as a volunteer. He knew how to avoid detection. But surely someone must have suspected something, called out a reporter from the Portland Press-Herald. He was living in the basement of a public library. Mr. Marsh maintained a normal residence on Elm Street and was considered a model citizen, Brennan replied. His volunteer work at the library was well regarded. He attended church regularly, paid his taxes, and had no criminal record. By all outward appearances, he was exactly what he seemed to be. What the sheriff didn't mention, what they had discovered in the past 48 hours, was that Robert Marsh had been far more calculating than anyone had realized. He had carefully selected victims who were newcomers to town, young women whose disappearances wouldn't immediately raise suspicions about local residents. Melissa Roberts had been planning to leave for college. Jennifer Wells had been talking about moving to Boston. Susan Martinez had been considering a job opportunity in New York. Patricia Nean had been having problems with her parents and had threatened to run away. When they disappeared, the assumption had been that they had simply followed through on their plans to leave town. Only Amy had been different. Amy had been a local girl with strong family ties, someone whose disappearance couldn't be explained away as easily. And that, Sarah realized, was why Marsh had kept her alive for 3 days. He had been trying to figure out how to make her disappearance fit the pattern. After the press conference, Sarah found herself walking through downtown Millbrook, trying to process the changes that had occurred in just a few days. The library was closed indefinitely, surrounded by yellow crime scene tape. The local diner was packed with reporters and curiosity seekers. Longtime residents huddled in small groups, talking in hushed tones about their disbelief and shame. She stopped at Kowalski's hardware store, remembering what Robert Marsh had said about the silver locket. The elderly man behind the counter looked up as she entered, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "You're Amy's sister," he said quietly. "I saw you on the news." "Mr. Kowalski, I wanted to talk to you about something Robert Marsh mentioned, a locket that belonged to your great-grandmother." The old man's face crumpled. "Sarah's locket. I've been looking for it for 20 years. My great-grandmother was wearing it when she died in the mill fire in 1923. It was the only thing of hers I had left." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out the small silver locket that had been returned to her after being processed as evidence. "The police said I could give this to you. Amy would have wanted you to have it." Mr. Kowalski took the locket with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "She was trying to bring it to me, wasn't she? That's why she was working late that night." "Yes. She was excited about reuniting you with your family's history. And that monster killed her for it." His voice was filled with rage and sorrow. "My great-grandmother died in a fire, and now Amy died because of her locket. It's cursed, that thing, cursed." Sarah left the hardware store feeling more unsettled than ever. The connections between past and present in Millbrook ran deeper than she had realized. Robert Marsh hadn't just been killing random young women. He had been trying to collect pieces of the town's history, to make himself the keeper of its memories and its secrets. That evening, she sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of Amy's belongings that their parents had never been able to throw away. Textbooks from her freshman year at UMaine, letters from high school friends, a diary with entries up to July 14, 1991. Sarah opened the diary to the last entry, written in Amy's careful handwriting. "Had an interesting day at the library today. Mr. Marsh showed me some old photographs from the mill fire. So sad to think about all those people who died. There was one woman, Sarah Kowalski, who was only 22 years old. She was wearing a beautiful locket in the photograph. Mr. Marsh says he thinks it might still be in the archive somewhere. I'm going to look for it tomorrow and see if I can find her family. Wouldn't it be wonderful to return something like that to where it belongs?" The final entry, written just hours before Amy's death, was a testament to her generous spirit and her belief in the importance of preserving history. She had died trying to do something good, trying to heal an old wound, but in the end that same kindness had killed her. 3 weeks after Robert Marsh's arrest, Detective Warren called Sarah with news that would change everything she thought she knew about her sister's death. "We found something in Marsh's house," Warren said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Hidden in a false bottom of his bedroom dresser. You need to see this." Sarah met Warren at the police station, where the detective led her to a small conference room. On the table sat a wooden box, old and carefully maintained. Inside, Sarah could see stacks of letters, photographs, and what appeared to be a journal. "This is Robert Marsh's confession," Warren explained. "Written over the course of 20 years. He documented everything, Sarah. Every victim, every method, every detail." She paused. "But there's something else. Something that changes what we thought we knew about Amy's death." Sarah's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" Warren opened the journal to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. "Read this. It's dated July 18th, 1991, 3 days after Amy disappeared." Sarah read the entry, her hands trembling. "Amy died tonight, not from the fall as I thought. She regained consciousness yesterday and seemed to be recovering. But when she realized what I had done, When she understood that I had killed other girls, she made a choice. She found a way to stop her own heart. What does that mean? Sarah whispered. Keep reading. Amy told me she had a heart condition, something she had never mentioned to her family because she didn't want them to worry. She said she carried medication for it, but she had hidden it from me. When she realized I was never going to let her go, she stopped taking her medication. She induced a heart attack, Sarah. She chose to die rather than become another trophy in my collection. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. She killed herself? She sacrificed herself, Warren corrected gently. According to Marsh's account, Amy figured out that he had been killing young women for years. She found evidence in the boiler room, things he had kept from previous victims. She realized that if she escaped, he would just find another girl to replace her. Sarah read on, each word cutting deeper into her heart. Amy said she was sorry for what this would do to her family, but she couldn't let me hurt anyone else. She said her sister Sarah would understand, that she would be proud of her for trying to protect other girls. She asked me to promise that I would stop, that she would be the last one. I promised her, but I lied. I always lie. Oh, God, Sarah breathed. She tried to save the others. There's more. Look at this. Warren showed her another entry, dated just 2 weeks later. I can't stop thinking about Amy's words. She said I was sick, that I needed help. She said she forgave me for what I had done to her, but she couldn't forgive me for what I might do to others. Even as she was dying, she was thinking about protecting people she would never meet. Sarah was crying now, overwhelmed by the realization that her sister had died as a hero, not a victim. Amy had figured out what was happening and had chosen to stop it the only way she could. But he didn't stop, Sarah said. He kept killing. No, Warren said quietly. That's what we thought, but we were wrong. Look at the dates on the personal effects we found. The latest victim was Patricia Nguyen in 1983. Everything after that was different. Warren opened another evidence bag, revealing a collection of items that looked newer, more recent. These aren't from murder victims. They're from graveyards. Marsh had been digging up graves, taking jewelry and personal effects from corpses. He was trying to recreate the feeling of his kills without actually killing. Sarah stared at the evidence, trying to process what she was hearing. Amy's death changed him? According to his journal, yes. He writes about how her sacrifice haunted him, how he couldn't bring himself to take another living victim after what she had done. He became obsessed with the idea of death instead of dying, if that makes sense. He started visiting cemeteries, stealing from the dead instead of creating new corpses. But why did he keep the boiler room? Why did he keep all those personal effects? Because he was still trapped in his fantasy. He would go down there and arrange the items, talk to them as if the victims were still alive. He convinced himself that he was keeping their memory alive, that he was honoring them somehow. Sarah felt sick. And Amy's glasses? Why did he melt them? Because she was the only one who had ever confronted him about what he was doing. She was the only one who had made him feel shame. He destroyed her glasses in a rage, but then he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. So he kept them, a reminder of the girl who had tried to save everyone else. The truth was almost too much to bear. Amy had died trying to protect other young women from Robert Marsh's madness, and in a twisted way, her sacrifice had actually worked. She had been his last murder victim, even if she hadn't been his last victim overall. There's one more thing, Warren said softly. We found letters that Marsh wrote to Amy over the years but never sent. Do you want to read them? Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she could handle much more. Warren handed her a stack of envelopes, all addressed to Amy Chen in heaven. The letters were rambling, contradictory, and deeply disturbing, but they all contained the same theme: Robert Marsh's acknowledgement that Amy had been right about him, that he was sick, and that her death had saved other lives. She won, Sarah said finally. Despite everything he did to her, she won. Yes, Warren agreed. She did. As Sarah left the police station that afternoon, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 13 years. Pride. Not just grief for what had been lost, but pride in what Amy had accomplished. Her sister had faced pure evil and had found a way to defeat it, even at the cost of her own life. The media would never know this part of the story. The details of Amy's sacrifice would remain sealed in the case files, too sensitive to release to the public. But Sarah knew, and that was enough. Amy Chen had died a hero. And finally, after 13 years, her family could lay her to rest with honor. The trial of Robert Marsh was scheduled for the following spring, but it would never take place. On a cold December morning, 3 months after his arrest, The 73-year-old man was found dead in his cell at the county jail. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but the suicide note he left behind told a different story. Sarah sat in Sheriff Brennan's office reading the note that had been addressed to her personally. Marsh's handwriting was shaky, that of an old man facing the end of his life. "Dear Sarah, I know you will never forgive me for what I did to your sister. I don't expect you to, but I want you to know that Amy was the strongest person I ever met. She faced death with more courage than I have ever shown in life. She made me promise to tell you something. She said that if anything happened to her, you should know that she loved you more than anything in the world. She said you were the smartest, bravest person she knew, and that you would grow up to do amazing things. She was right. You came back to find her when no one else could. You gave her the justice she deserved. I have lived with what I did for 20 years. I cannot live with it anymore. Amy's sacrifice saved lives, but it could not save my soul. That was already lost. Please tell the other families that I am sorry. Sorry for what I took from them. Sorry for the years of uncertainty. Sorry for the pain I caused. They deserved better from me. Their daughters deserved better. Robert Marsh." Sarah folded the letter carefully, her hands steady despite the tears in her eyes. She had thought she wanted to see Robert Marsh pay for his crimes in court, to watch him face the families of his victims. But this seemed more fitting somehow. He had lived with his guilt for 20 years, and in the end it had killed him. "How are you feeling about all this?" Sheriff Brennan asked quietly. "Sad," Sarah said honestly. "Sad for everyone involved. Amy, the other girls, their families. Even for him, in a way. He was a sick man who did terrible things, but he was still a human being who suffered." "That's very generous of you." Amy was generous too. She found a way to forgive him even as she was dying. "I think she would want me to find some peace with this." The funerals for the identified victims were held over the next several weeks. Sarah attended each one, standing with families she had never met, but who had become part of her extended family through shared grief. They were finally able to bury their daughters, to say goodbye properly after decades of uncertainty. Amy's memorial service was held at the Millbrook Community Church on a bright Saturday in January. The sanctuary was packed with people who had known her, people who had searched for her, and people who had simply been touched by her story. Mrs. Henderson spoke about Amy's dedication to preserving history and helping others. Former classmates shared memories of her kindness and enthusiasm. Detective Warren talked about her courage and sacrifice, but it was Sarah's eulogy that brought the congregation to tears. "My sister Amy was 19 years old when she died. She was young and beautiful and full of dreams. She wanted to be a librarian, to spend her life helping people find information and stories that would enrich their lives. She wanted to preserve history, to make sure that the stories of ordinary people weren't forgotten. In the end, she did exactly that. She made sure that the stories of 7 young women wouldn't be forgotten. She made sure that their families would have answers, that their deaths would have meaning. She saved lives by giving up her own. Amy died as she lived, thinking of others before herself, trying to protect people she had never met, believing in the fundamental goodness of humanity, even when faced with its darkest side. She was everything I wanted to be when I grew up, and she still is. I spent 13 years wondering what happened to my sister. Now I know. She became a hero. After the service, Sarah walked through the cemetery where Amy was finally laid to rest. The headstone was simple. Amy Chen, 1972-1991. Beloved daughter and sister. She saved lives. The Millbrook Public Library reopened 3 months later, after extensive renovations that sealed off the basement areas permanently. A new memorial reading room was established on the 2nd floor, dedicated to Amy Chen and the other victims of Robert Marsh. It was a quiet place where people could go to read and reflect, surrounded by books and bathed in natural light. Sarah had moved back to Millbrook permanently, taking a job as a high school history teacher. She wanted to be close to Amy's memory, to the place where her sister had made her final stand against evil. On weekends, she volunteered at the library, helping to catalogue the historical archives that Amy had loved so much. The town had changed. The revelation of Robert Marsh's crimes had shattered the illusion of safety that small communities often cherish. But it had also brought people together, creating a stronger sense of community and vigilance. Parents were more careful about who they trusted with their children. Young women were more aware of the dangers that could lurk behind friendly faces. And in the memorial reading room, visitors could find a small display case containing some of Amy's personal effects: her library school textbooks, her volunteer badge, and a photograph of her reading to children at the library's summer program. The display case was never locked. Amy's story was meant to be shared, not hidden away. On the first anniversary of the discovery of Amy's glasses, Sarah returned to the memorial reading room. She sat in the comfortable chair by the window, reading from one of the books Amy had loved, feeling her sister's presence in the quiet space. A young woman approached, maybe 20 years old, with the kind of eager, intelligent expression that Amy had worn. She was carrying a stack of books about library science. "Excuse me," the young woman said. "I'm researching Amy Chen for a paper I'm writing about heroes in library science. I was wondering if you could tell me anything about her?" Sarah looked up from her book and smiled. "I can tell you everything about her. She was my sister." And so Amy's story continued, passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that her sacrifice would never be forgotten. In death, she had achieved what she had always wanted in life. She had become a keeper of history, a guardian of memory, a protector of the innocent. The melted glasses had revealed a truth that had been hidden for 13 years. But the real truth was simpler and more profound. Love is stronger than evil. Courage is more powerful than fear. And sometimes the greatest heroes are ordinary people who choose to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. Amy Chen had made that choice. And in doing so, she had saved not just the lives of potential future victims, but the soul of her community, and the hearts of everyone who knew her story. 5 years after Amy's memorial service, Sarah stood in the same reading room that had been dedicated to her sister's memory. The space had evolved into something more than just a quiet place to read. It had become a gathering place for families affected by violent crime, a resource center for those seeking to understand and prevent such tragedies. The Amy Chen Foundation, established with donations from across the country, provided support for families of missing persons and funded research into the psychology of serial killers. Sarah served as its director, finding purpose in work that honored her sister's memory while helping others navigate the same dark path her family had walked. "Sarah," a woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Jennifer Martinez, a young reporter from the Portland Press-Herald who had been covering the Foundation's work. "I wanted to thank you again for agreeing to the interview. I know it's not easy to talk about." "It's important," Sarah replied, settling into the chair where she had spent countless hours over the past 5 years. "Amy's story needs to be told not just as a tragedy, but as an example of how ordinary people can make extraordinary choices." Jennifer set up her recording equipment and opened her notebook. "Can you tell me about the impact Amy's story has had on the community?" Sarah looked around the reading room, taking in the changes that had occurred over the years. The memorial display had expanded to include information about all of Robert Marsh's victims, creating a permanent record of their lives and dreams. Local high schools brought students here for lessons about personal safety and the importance of trusting their instincts. "Millbrook is a different place now," Sarah said, "not because people are more afraid, but because they're more aware, more connected to each other. Amy's death taught us that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, but it also taught us that good people will always find a way to fight back." The Foundation has identified 3 other cases where the Amy Chen protocol has been used successfully. Can you explain what that means? Sarah smiled at the term. Mental health professionals had begun using Amy's story as a case study in crisis intervention, teaching people how to recognize when someone was in immediate danger and how to make difficult choices under extreme pressure. Amy figured out that reasoning with Robert Marsh wasn't going to work. She realized that her only chance to save other potential victims was to remove herself from the equation entirely. It was an incredibly brave decision, and it's helped other people in similar situations find the courage to take action. "What about the families of the other victims? Are they still in contact with you?" "We've become a kind of extended family. We get together every year on the anniversary of Amy's death, not to mourn but to celebrate what she accomplished. Mrs. Wells, Jennifer's mother, always says that Amy gave her daughter's death meaning. That's something all of us needed." Jennifer made notes as Sarah spoke. "There's been some criticism that the Foundation glorifies suicide as a solution to problems. How do you respond to that?" Sarah had heard this criticism before, and she understood the concern. Amy didn't commit suicide. She made a tactical decision to save lives. There's a difference. She wasn't depressed or hopeless. She was trapped by a killer who had no intention of letting her go. Her choice was between becoming another victim or stopping a serial killer. She chose to stop him. And it worked. Yes, it worked. Robert Marsh never killed again after Amy's death. He became obsessed with death instead of dying, which is horrifying in its own way, but it meant that other young women got to live full lives instead of ending up in his basement. The interview continued for another hour, covering the Foundation's work, the changes in Millbrook, and the ongoing research into the psychology of serial killers that Amy's case had inspired. When Jennifer finally packed up her equipment, Sarah felt the familiar mix of exhaustion and satisfaction that came from sharing her sister's story. As evening approached, Sarah made her way to the cemetery where Amy was buried. The headstone was weathered now, softened by 5 years of Maine winters, but the inscription remained clear: she saved lives. Other headstones had been added to the small memorial section: Melissa Roberts, Jennifer Wells, Susan Martinez, Patricia Nguyen, and the others whose names had been lost to time, but whose lives had been remembered through Amy's sacrifice. Their families visited regularly, leaving flowers and small tokens of remembrance. Sarah knelt beside Amy's grave, brushing away the fallen leaves that had accumulated there. "I had another interview today," she said quietly. "People still want to know about you, about what you did. I think you'd be amazed at how many lives your story has touched." A cold wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of snow. Sarah pulled her coat tighter and continued talking to her sister, a ritual she had maintained for 5 years. "I'm proud of you, Amy. Not just for what you did in that basement, but for who you were. You were always the one who saw the best in people, who believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid." As she walked back to her car, Sarah thought about the young woman who had approached her earlier that day, the one studying library science. There had been dozens of them over the years, young women inspired by Amy's story to pursue careers in libraries and information science. They called themselves Amy's Army, and they carried her mission forward in their own way. The Millbrook Public Library was thriving now, busier than it had ever been. The memorial reading room was rarely empty, filled with students, researchers, and ordinary citizens who came to read and reflect. Mrs. Henderson had retired the previous year, replaced by a young librarian who made it her mission to ensure that Amy's story remained part of the library's identity. Sarah started her car and drove through the familiar streets of Millbrook, past the house where she and Amy had grown up, past the church where they had attended services as children, past the high school where Amy had dreamed of becoming a librarian. The town looked the same on the surface, but Sarah knew that everything had changed. Robert Marsh's house on Elm Street had been torn down years ago, replaced by a small park dedicated to victims of violent crime. The basement of the library had been sealed permanently, its dark history buried beneath tons of concrete and steel. But the memory of what had happened there lived on, a reminder of both the capacity for evil and the power of love to overcome it. At home, Sarah settled into her study, surrounded by boxes of letters from people who had been touched by Amy's story, teachers who used her example in their classrooms, counselors who shared her story with clients facing difficult decisions, parents who named their daughters Amy in honor of her sacrifice. She opened a recent letter from a woman in California whose daughter had been missing for 3 years. The woman wrote about how Amy's story had given her hope, not that her daughter was still alive, but that even in death, people could make choices that mattered. "Your sister showed me that even in the darkest circumstances, we can choose to be heroes," the woman had written. "That gives me comfort, knowing that if something terrible happened to my daughter, she might have found a way to help others, just like Amy did." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box with the others. "Tomorrow," she would write back, offering what comfort she could to another family walking the same difficult path. It was hard work, emotionally draining, but it was also healing. Every person who found strength in Amy's story was proof that her sister's sacrifice had meaning. As she prepared for bed, Sarah paused at the window overlooking the street where she and Amy had played as children. The maple tree they had climbed was still there, its bare branches reaching toward the star-filled sky. Somewhere in those stars, Sarah liked to think, Amy was watching over the town she had died to protect. "Good night, Amy," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me what it means to be brave." The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities to share Amy's story and help others find their own courage. But tonight, Sarah felt the peace that comes from knowing that love is stronger than hate, that good can triumph over evil, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things. Amy Chen had made that choice, and her legacy would live on in every person who heard her story and decided to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to stand up for what was right. The melted glasses had revealed a truth that had been hidden for 13 years, but the real truth was eternal. In the end, love wins. Always.